Hi, I'm Suze Shaner with Sage Leadership Strategies, and I'm your host today of Community Forum. And I have the great pleasure to have with me Reverend Kathleen Rudoff, Reverend Dr. Kathleen Rudoff. I'm sorry, I forgot the doctor. Welcome, Reverend.
Hi, Suze. It's good to be with you.
Well, thanks for coming. I'm sorry I left off the doctor. That's important.
That's okay. It's new, so I didn't even notice it.
Oh, new as of when?
Well, new as of a couple of years ago, but it takes a while to get used to something like that.
Yeah, well, okay. What I want to do with our listeners is just share a little bit about your background and brag about you for a little bit. So you've served Unitarian Universalist congregations across the United States for the last 15 years. 2016 to 19, you were the executive director of the Yale Humanist Community. You've authored a children's book and a series of gratitude journals. You received your Master's of Divinity from Meadville Lombard Theological School in Chicago and your Doctorate of Divinity from New York Theological School in New York City, with a focus on MultiFaith Ministry. And you currently teach in the Peace and Justice Masters of Arts program for Claremont Lincoln University in California. And you are the local minister here to Danbury, Connecticut of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation. That's quite a lot. So I'm curious, I want to start first with this whole notion of multi-faith ministry, but can you take us through, first and foremost, I do know that you were raised as a Southern Baptist. So tell us a little bit about your journey. How did you come to UUism, first and foremost? And then what made you decide to want to go deeper in that and become a minister?
Sure. And it's interesting because the whole multi-faith ministry actually connects with all of this. So I did grow up in the Southern Baptist church, and my grandfather was a deacon and my father was a deacon. So I was very ensconced in the culture and tradition, but always had questions, even from the time I was a very, very young girl, because I had friends, very few, but I happened to seek out and find one of the few Catholic families in my neighborhood. And in high school, one of only a couple of Jewish classmates. So I was always so curious about how other people kind of practiced their religion. And I started into my adult life. And as a Southern Baptist in Connecticut, I felt such a strong calling. It wasn't a voice. It was just something within myself that was saying, ministry is something you should be doing with your life. It made no sense to me. I could not figure out why in the world I was feeling this calling. And I spoke to my then Southern Baptist minister, who didn't understand it either, because women would not be accepted in the role of minister or that type of leadership position. So I put it on the back burner.
So I have a question. I'm curious. So when you went to your own minister in the faith that you were raised in, and you're saying they really didn't have women ministers, and you said, hey, I have this calling, I feel like I'm meant to do this. Did they dismiss you, poo-poo it? Like, what was the reaction?
Well, the exact words that were said to me were, you are going to make a fine minister's wife. So that was the reaction to, and they were very sincere. It was not meant to in any way dismiss me. I mean, that was the best that they could do to make sense of what I was talking about.
So this is so interesting. So given how you were raised and the values, it sounds like from early on in your childhood, there was something where you were curious about other religions that by the very nature of it, I'm assuming meant there were things that were like, you were sort of like, I don't know about this. This doesn't feel quite right. What do other people do? And so you were able to open your mind, and yet you still, as an adult, stayed on the Southern Baptist path. So when that minister responded in that way, where did you go with that? And at what point did you decide to leave the church that you were raised in? Because that has strong, conscious and subconscious roots to it.
Sure. And it didn't offend me as much at the time as it did later, but I knew that that was not the answer. That was not what I was being called to do. So after a series of other events, actually my youngest brother coming out as a gay man and my parents being snubbed was really a final straw for me, to see my family suffering and no longer feeling part of a community that had meant so much for generations in my family. So I went on a search, as many people do when there's some kind of a crisis in their life and they're seeking. And I happened upon, after many different things, this place that didn't look like a church, but I had read about it somewhere. I had seen something in a newspaper, and it just looked kind of like a barn in the woods of Connecticut. It wasn't easy to find. And I remember going in, my husband at the time and I, we had no idea where the door was, how you got in, because this didn't look like a typical church. So we waited in the car until we saw other people going in, and we saw where they went in, and we went in. And literally, when we walked in, just the feeling was overwhelming that, wow, I think we just found a home.
What about it? Like, was it just the overall environment, the atmosphere, or there were things said and done, or how people operate? Like, what about it where you're like, oh, I'm home? I don't know if that's how you felt, but.
Yeah, it is how we both felt, because we were just immediately welcomed, immediately accepted, which seemed very strange to me. Nobody was asking me, if I believed XYZ, or making sure I didn't do ABC. It was just by my own humanity, I was welcomed to become a part of this, to see if it was a fit for me. And I had never really experienced that before. So it was then I just gradually became more and more involved. And that call I felt years ago actually came back to me. And I began to think, maybe this is what that's about. And I had a couple of people and the minister at the time in that Unitarian Universalist congregation ask me without any prompting if I had ever considered professional ministry. And
what prompted them to ask you that, do you think?
I was serving on the Sunday services committee, the one that puts services together and assists the minister. And I had done a service myself, and probably just with my passion and enthusiasm, there was just something that these two people saw in me that I had not really been completely comfortable sharing, because it just was so strange to me that I could be accepted and that someone would think of me in that way. It wasn't where I came from. So this was really something quite different. But once they said it, the bells just went off. This is it. And it's from there, as they say, the rest is history. It was just a whole shift in my life, and my real journey to where I am now began.
So for those that are not, listening, who are not familiar with Unitarian Universalism, can you share your overview of what it is and your orientation to it? And I'm curious, because a lot of people come to it from other religions.
Sure.
So your orientation to it in terms of how you kind of resolved it from where you came from.
Sure. So I'll explain it as how I first came to know it, because I think that's the best way for someone who may be listening and may not be familiar, because I asked a lot of questions. And that is one of the most important things. I asked a lot of questions. I had never been in a position where I felt I could ask a lot of questions.
That had to be very, very freeing for you. And what were some of the questions you had that you were like, wait a minute, nobody's allowed me to ask these questions before?
Right. Well, I was shocked that you could come from somewhere else and you didn't necessarily have to throw everything else away. That was a part of who you are. You're not cutting off your hand. You're bringing that hand with you. So that was very different. And I had questioned, are you sure? Really? But I come from a Southern Baptist background, which was very different and I didn't know anyone else in that congregation who came from the same background. So I really had to make sure, was this real? It was something so different, so foreign, if you will, to me. And then we came down to different theological questions about the idea of salvation, about the idea of Unitarianism as opposed to Trinitarianism. I'd never heard of such a thing. And I thought,
those folks who don't know what that is, can you explain the distinctions?
Sure. So actually, we were Unitarians and Universalists. We were not together until 1961. So both Unitarianism and Universalism have been around for centuries and were brought over to this country from European countries. Unitarians were rejecting the Trinity. They did not believe that God was three different things, that it was one. God was one. Universalists were rejecting the Calvinism doctrine of predestination, that however you were born, you were predestined to go to heaven or to go to hell, no matter what you did. So there was a rejection of that and saying, no, God would not damn people to hell. Everybody would be saved, if you will. So it's a Judeo-Christian traditions that then came together finally in 1961 to be what we now call Unitarian Universalists. But the idea of universal salvation and the idea of Unitarianism, God is one, those were brand new ideas to me. I had never heard of it before. I thought this must be something new. And through my questioning, I found out, no, this was here near the founding of this country. We've had presidents who were Unitarians. We've had all kinds of people in different kinds of celebrity ranks who were abiding by Unitarianism and Universalism, and even today, UUism. So I was really given quite a history lesson on that. This was part of the foundation kind of the country itself.
Well, I think a lot of people don't know that there are a lot of the founding fathers and their fathers who were UUs. And I also think, I mean, I'm a practicing UU, came to it through another religion as well. But I think there's probably a lot of people who are UUs and don't know it. What would you say about that?
That was a very common phrase when I first became involved in Unitarian Universalism. And I can still find myself occasionally saying that when I speak to someone. And I think what it's really talking about is not necessarily about the denomination itself. It's about connecting to values, because I don't think that it is about beliefs. And this is where I've kind of evolved in my own Unitarian Universalism to see that beliefs are not what hold us together. It's the common values we have that hold us together. And Unitarian Universalism has these 7 principles and purposes that we ascribe to. No creed, but these principles that we strive to live according to these principles and purposes, which are basically about being the best human being you can be. And that's all about values. That's not about beliefs. So I do think there are a lot of people who would probably find themselves in line with this idea of living according to values and ascribing to these 7 principles and purposes.
Well, there's a strong social justice component in terms of challenging or being invited into or being invited in, called into living what your values are in the world. What would you say to that?
Oh, yes, it's very much about, we often say we're about deeds, not creeds. That's another one of those little sayings that Unitarian Universalists are pretty famous for. And that will look different. I want to make sure people know that looks different for every person. And it's one of the beauties, I think, of Unitarian Universalism. We are not all expected to do the exact same work in the exact same way at the exact same time. It is part of journeying together and supporting each other as we try to live out those values. And for some of us, some of these things are easy for us to do, or we can jump right in there. And for others of us, we need more support to get to that point. But it's about the journeying together and using those values to keep us together and encouraging the work that we're called to do as Unitarian Universalists in our community and then in the wider world.
Yeah, really a strong focus on community building and living. And I know in your doctoral studies, you focused on multi-faith ministry. Can you speak to that and how it plays into your chosen denomination of UUism?
Sure. So this is where I was saying it connected. I had this curiosity as a child growing up at a Southern Baptist church, but was not encouraged, to say the least, to really study, to research, to ask questions about that. So that's one of the things that drew me to Unitarian Universalism, was because I was speaking with people, many who came from different religious backgrounds, and some who still held to some of the culture and religious tradition that they had been raised with or that they had found, which fascinated me. So that was an important part of my evolution to the doctorate program, where my focus was on multi-faith ministry. And the specific focus was in Connecticut, actually. And because of my work at Yale with the Yale humanist community, I was looking in Connecticut at those who identify as humanist, which could be atheist, agnostic, could be Unitarian Universalist, unchurched, or as the Pew Research likes to call them, nuns, Nones, and who were doing social action, social justice work here in Connecticut. And then the multi-faith groups, sometimes they're just clergy, but sometimes they involve other people who were doing some of the same work. And you're thinking, if these groups can come together, if we are willing to work together, imagine how much more we can get done rather than siloing and doing our own, when we're all holding together some of the same values when it comes to social justice in Connecticut. So my doctorate was really focused on educating these groups about each other, because they didn't even know each other existed, and seeing if there may be possibilities for groups to come together and work together.
Well, that's really interesting, because as you're saying, they may be doing some similar work externally, but internally they have a different reason or lens or framework or orientation, internal orientation to the work. In other words, some people have said of UUism, it feels more like a social club, or based on the values, or based on ethics or morality, but is it really a religion? I know my father-in-law said it, seems like any excuse for a holy day and a holiday. I kind of like that, but well, what would you say to that?
That doesn't bother me as much as when I hear that Unitarian Universalists, they can just believe whatever they want. They just do whatever they want. And that is not true.
Well, there is a course, UUism, on building your own theology. Now, some religions would say that's blasphemous. So can you say something about that? If you can build your own theology, can you believe whatever you want?
If we use the 7 principles and purposes as our guide, yes, you can build your own theology, but with that as the foundation, you certainly cannot believe whatever you want, meaning that if you believe there is a race that is superior over another race, if you have beliefs that are actually negatively impacting other people's being, their very being in the world, that is not something that is acceptable to Unitarian Universalists. And that's where a lot of people, they think that, you just do whatever you want, you believe whatever you want. No, there are parameters, there are guidelines that we use in our life. So to me, it's important for people to understand that, because we are accepting and welcoming. I like to say, we welcome all people. We do not welcome all behaviors. It is not a free for all. We have a reverence for nature. We care very much about what is happening with the climate, on our planet. And we don't believe that you are wasteful, that you take advantage of resources. So there are lines that are drawn, but we're also open to conversation and listening and really hearing one another. So to me, there's a difference.
Yeah. So you're saying, let's be clear about the context in which there's some freedom to create your own credo and belief within that context and the parameters of the values. I think that that's a challenge for some of you, is the 7 guiding principles, because it's like, can you memorize them? I mean, obviously the first one you're talking to is the inherent worth and dignity of all people, but I think it's hard to keep the way they're written in your head. Can you say anything about that?
Yes. Yeah, that's true. And I don't have them memorized. I did it one time when I was in seminary, but I don't have them all memorized. But, when we look at, one of them is about recognizing the fact that we are part of the interdependent web of all life. And that's kind of where some of our environmental kind of looking at is that we are stewards of the environment because of that interdependent web that we are a part of. Taking a look at the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And that was another draw for me. That's one of our principles and purposes, that we affirm and promote, the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And that's not always easy. And you don't find that in a lot of religious communities, where we also encourage each other, some of the wording, to spiritual growth.
Well, so, on that point, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to share something, which I actually came upon it, maybe 6 months before 9/11. And then right after 9/11 hit, came to a service because, everyone was in shock. And so 9/11 happened on a Tuesday and this was a Sunday. I think the thing that really struck me is that service that I went to, they invited a leader from the Islam faith. So in other words, when the world was pushing away, saying, oh my gosh, it's the Muslims or whatever, because of the terrorism, this religion was like, let's understand, let's bring them closer. Let's understand this religion a little more. That kind of struck me as, maybe there's something here from a place of wisdom and curiosity, learning and understanding. What would you say about that?
No, I'm so glad to hear that you were able to have that experience and that opportunity was there. And I think that is a really good example of where we draw the sources that we draw inspiration from, the sources that we draw from in order to live out those principles and purposes. And one of those sources is really taking a look at the wisdom in world religions, being able to look, we don't have one sacred text. We see music as sacred. We see poetry as sacred text. We see the texts of various world religions, the direct experience of mystery and wonder. All of those are sources, the prophetic words of men and women throughout history working for social justice. Those are all sources that we draw from. So how great it was to be able to really live the principles, draw from the sources, and have someone come and be there to listen to truly listen to what someone has to say, when the whole world around us is saying, we don't talk to them, we don't listen to them, we don't see them, they are other. And that's one of the beauties also of Unitarian Universalism. We're not perfect. We are far from perfect. And we often have to call each other back to being our best selves. But we do have something to draw on, and we are willing to say, I want to listen, I want to learn, I want to be inspired by things other than what I know right at hand. And that's a beauty.
That's really challenging, especially when you're confronted with sometimes your own experience, your own belief system. Yeah, I mean, what else would you say about like this space to really stay open to learn and listen? And also a big component of it is community, living in community where there are differences. And there's a lot of congregations have the mixture of what you said. That you might find people who also believe in or were raised, Jewish, Catholic, might find atheists, humanism, people who attend UU services, all under that umbrella. And so some might say, how can that be?
I think that's one of the biggest challenges. And that's where we will fall short from time to time. We will not be perfect. There are times when our humanness is going to sometimes get in the way. But that's what being in community is about, because we can support one another. We can rely on one another. We give and we receive. That's one of the most important things in any kind of a spiritual community. You have to be able to give, but also to receive. And we call each other back. I just ask people, just don't take your toys and leave the sandbox.
Right.
Stay there. Stay there and listen and learn, and we will help each other to be able to better understand.
So you're fairly recently supporting the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Danbury. So what draw you in particular to this community, and what makes this community unique?
Sure. Unique. Well, I was drawn to it because I was a member of this community years ago. That was that barn, that first UU community. And I happened to be at a time in my life where I'm kind of slowing down a little in my ministry, and was looking for, it needed to be in a particular area that was close to me. It needed to be, a particular number of hours. And I know this community to be an amazing community. It's been around for 200 years. And that in itself is a tremendous milestone. And Danbury is a fantastic community for a Unitarian Universalist congregation to be a part of. There is diversity in Danbury. There are issues for us to come together with other folks in Danbury to work on together. So, and I don't think it's unique. I think it's just a beloved community that is seeking to be the best they can be and to support others in the community. And I don't want that to be unique. I really wish that would be considered just a standard of being human and being a member of a wider community. And I think it's a place where people who are looking to do that, who are looking for a community to give and receive, can come and see what the UU Congregation of Danbury is all about.
What would we have 1 minute, what would your parting words be to somebody who's in despair of the state of affairs? And maybe with that, you can give them any contact information if they were interested in checking out the UCD, the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Danbury.
Sure. Some things that seem senseless really are senseless. We cannot make sense of everything that happens in the world. All we can do is make sure we are taking care of ourselves. And I would say if someone is watching and they're just feeling desperation, they're feeling overwhelmed by the state of affairs in the world, their own grief, their own things that are going on, life is worth living. Find yourself a community. It could be the UU Congregation of Danbury. Find yourself a place where you can receive the support you need and you can give, because no matter who you are, you also have something to give of yourself. Being in community together is what is really needed right now, and it's there for you, and maybe this will be the place. So you can email me, you can check out the website, and you can come and visit us.
Okay, what's your email?
You can reach me at uurevkathleen@gmail.com. Or you can check out the UUCD website. Now you're going to test me on it and see if I can remember the website. I believe it's uudanbury.org. But you Google it and we come right up because we're the only one in Danbury. You can't miss us.
Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Kathleen, for coming on the show.
Thank you, Suze. It's a pleasure.
Okay. I'm Suze Shaner with Community Forum. Until next time, thank you for joining us.